All right, I hope everybody's awake today. We're going to dive into something that's extremely important as we get into our technical drawings, and that's going to be measuring distance. We talked a little bit about dimensioning the other day and adding those measurements to our drawings, but that's probably a little bit hard to do if we haven't really went over our measuring yet. So that's what we're going to start focusing on now. There's two different measuring systems we're going to talk about. One is the U.S. Customary, the other is the International System of Units. Maybe you've probably heard that referred to as the metric system. We are going to start with U.S. Customary today. It's a little bit more popular here in the United States, and then we'll get into the metric system here in a couple days. So the first thing we're going to look at is just an exploded view of 1 inch. Okay, so to give you guys an idea, when I say an exploded 1 inch area, I'm referring to the distance between any given inch, okay, and these lines within there, which also brings us to the scale we are working with. So if you hear the term maybe an 1/8 of an inch, or a 16th, or a 32nd, or a 64th, these are all talking about the scale we're on, okay, and the easiest way for you to figure out what scale you're on is to count the lines within any one of those inches. So for instance, if I look up here, I can see that I have, or if I count them, I'll see that I have 16 lines there. That tells me I'm on a 16th scale. If I look at this other ruler, and I count the lines in between any one of these inches, these ones right here, if I counted those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that would be an 1/8 scale. This one down here is the same as what we looked at up here, but if I count those lines, I'll have 16 lines within there. That would mean I'm on a 16th scale. Now if I flip that over, this is more of a machinist rule, and it's getting very, very fine, a little bit more fine than we need for the uses we have, or uses we have here in technology. But this top one, if I were to count these, I have 32 lines, so I'd be on a 32nd scale. And if you look down here at the bottom, these ones are getting so close together you can barely even see them anymore, but there are 64 lines there, and that would be a 64th scale. If you didn't notice yet, they all seem to keep doubling. So maybe we had an 1/8 scale, to a 16th scale, to a 32nd scale, to a 64th scale, and that's because we need those increments within that inch all to be equal. Okay, and that's going to help us bring those measurements together here in a second. So we're going to go back to the whiteboard, and we're going to talk about what each of those little lines mean. And it's going to bring you back to your math class and some of your fractions, so I hope you guys are up to speed with that stuff. And if you're not, I would recommend that you take a little bit extra time. This is something you'd certainly be able to use through many aspects of your life. So whether it's doing your homework, working in your math class or technology, trying to measure a piece of furniture to see if it'll make it through your door, or centering something on a wall, okay? I imagine that you'll use measuring the rest of your life, especially if you know how to do it. Otherwise, some things might not come out the way you'd like. All right, so back to the board, and we'll start talking about these little increments here. All right, so we're going to get started. And a reminder, we are working in U.S. Customary at the moment. We are going to break this down, or I guess build up to our 16th scale. So we'll start with a 1/2 scale, we'll move to a 1/4 scale, to an 1/8, and finish with our 16th scale, okay? So really what we're going to do is kind of recreate each one of these, add a little bit to it each time until we're down to our 16th, okay? But to get a 1/2 scale, if we had the exploded version of 1 inch, okay, and we split that in half, like we have here, we have given ourselves a 1/2, okay? We've got that into a 1/2 scale. Pretty simple at that point. I don't think anybody will have any issues with that. What I do want you to notice right off the bat is that our line sizes for what we have here. If you look at your ruler, the whole numbers, the lines for those are a little bit larger. All right, and as we move down in scale, we'll get smaller line sizes. So the 1/2 scale, all your 1/2 inch marks are the next size down. All right, So whole numbers are the longest lines, halves are the next, and that's going to bring us into our quarter scale. I'll use a different color for that to help identify this, but we know that this was a half from our last time. But if we wanted to break this down into a quarter scale, what would we do next? Hopefully you guys are thinking split those in half, okay? So if we split our halves in half with a line a little bit smaller, we have now broken this down into a 1/4 scale or quarter scale. So if you want to count these with me, we can say 1/4, 2 quarters, 2 is half of 4, so it's also our half if we reduce it, and 3 quarters, 4 quarters. 4 goes into 4 one time and gives us our whole number of 1. Okay, but again, we're at a quarter scale and we broke that down into 4 equal components. All right, so now we'll bring that down to our 1/8 scale. All right, I'll transfer our quarters there. Line sizes were a little bit smaller. All right, but we need to bring this down to an 1/8 scale. How would we do that? Hopefully you're thinking the same thing we just did up here. We're going to split those in half into equal increments. So now, let's split each one of those in half with a slightly smaller line. And we would know that's an 1/8 scale because we have 8 increments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, and if we want to count these together, we could say 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, which is 4 is half of 8, so we knew that was our half from earlier. 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8, or 1, right? So there, we are down to our 1/8 scale at this point. We can bring that down one more to our 16th scale, and it's really about as small as we need to get for the technology or math classes that we have here. Well, I won't speak for your math teacher, but as far as technology goes, we won't really have to get to any smaller increments than 1/16 this year. All right, so how would we do that? All right, let's add all our lines from the previous. So we have our quarters, and we have our 1/8. But we need this down to a 16th scale. So how are we going to do that? We're going to split it in half again, right? So let's add some lines. A little bit smaller again. As they go down, we see the line sizes go down. And we can start counting these. 1/16, 2/16, 3/16, 4/16. 4 is a quarter of 16. This was also our quarters, right? 5/16, 6/16, 7/16, 8/16. Here's our half again, right? 9/16, 10/16, 11/16, 12/16, which is 3 quarters, 13/16, 14/16, 15/16, and 16/16. So our 1, right? Now we look at a lot of these little increments. We know that we had an 1/8. We're calling it a 2/16 right now. How do we know if we can reduce our measurement? All right, hopefully you've done that in your math class. But what I'd recommend, if you see 2 even numbers, you can reduce that, okay? So for instance, 2/16 can be reduced to 1/8. 2 goes into 16 8 times. All right, 4/16, 4 goes into 16 4 times, okay? So it's 1/4. 8 goes into 16 twice. That's 1/2, okay? So you really need to get really good at reducing your measurements. So please make sure that you understand how to reduce your fractions. We will talk about it a little bit more as we go through this, but please make sure you reach out if you're struggling with that. So really that's how we get down to our 16th scale. Alright guys, when you start with your ruler, it's extremely important to pay attention to where you begin. If you notice this ruler, the first large line we see here is your starting point. You have to be very careful because that could also be the start of your ruler. Some of them are slightly different. So always pay attention to that starting point. From there, all we're going to do is line up the beginning of our line, and we're going to come out to our first whole number, which is 4. And we can count our lines after that. We know we have 16 of them here, so this is to a 1/16 of an inch. And we should count out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that would be 4 and 5/16. Can we reduce that? Hopefully you're saying no. We see that odd number on top, so that isn't going to divide into our denominator, or our bottom number there. So that cannot be reduced. So let's try one more, and I'll let you guys have some practice. Alright, so I'm going to start that line at the beginning. Come out to my first whole number again. I'm past the 6, so I'll take that 6 and count my lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 6 and 12 out of 16, because we're in a 16th scale. And hopefully you guys are looking at that saying that you can reduce it. So we know that 4 goes into 12 3 times and 16 4 times. So it can be reduced to 6 3/4. All right, let's get you some practice. Good luck.